The mud tasted like copper and rot. Private Kael pressed his face into the churned earth, listening to the wet screams of his squad being torn apart somewhere behind him. A titan had crashed through their line, a plague spawn brute the size of a barn, its head a quilt of weeping sores and chitinous plates. Kael had been thrown clear by the shockwave of its first stomp, landing hard against a collapsed trench wall. Now he lay pinned, a timber across his legs, blood trickling into his eyes from a gash in his scalp. The sky was a bruised purple, choked with smoke and the ash of burning bodies. The air stank of ozone and offal. He could hear the titan's labored breathing, a wet, rattling sound like a dying bellows, punctuated by the crunch of bone. Another soldier's scream cut short. Then silence. Kael's heart hammered against his ribs. He was a nameless grunt, a conscript from a farming village that no longer existed on any map. He had no name, no rank worth remembering. Just a rusty sword and a dented breastplate that was already cracked. He was supposed to die here, like the rest of them. That was the plan. Feed the meat grinder until it clogged. But the silence was worse than the screams. It meant the titan was looking for more prey. He tried to shift the timber. Pain lanced through his left leg, but he bit down on the leather strap of his vambrace, tasting salt and rust. The timber groaned but didn't budge. He was trapped. A rat in a hole. The ground trembled. The titan was moving. Each step was a seismic thud that rattled Kael's teeth. He craned his neck, peering through the haze. The monster was 20 feet away, its head swiveling on a thick, corded neck. Its face was a nightmare, a gaping mouth filled with needle teeth, and where eyes should have been, there were only pulsating, tumorous sacs. It didn't see. It sensed. Smelled the blood. It turned toward him. Kael's breath caught. He fumbled for his sword, his fingers slid with mud. The blade was chipped, the edge dull. A joke of a weapon. But it was all he had. The titan took another step. Then another. It was 10 feet away now, close enough that Kael could see the maggots rising in the sores on its flank. Its head lowered, the maw opening wide, a black, bottomless pit that promised an end. No, Kael whispered. Not like this. He had nothing. No skill, no strength, no hope. But he had rage. A hot, stupid rage that burned through the fear. He grabbed the sword and, with a scream that tore his throat raw, he lunged forward as far as his pinned body would allow. The sword stabbed upward, not at the maw, but at the titan's ankle, the only part of it within reach. The blade punched through the chitin. It was a shallow wound, a pinprick. But it was enough. The titan roared. A deafening, wet sound that sprayed black ichor across Kael's face. It reared back, its leg lifting, and Kael's sword was torn from his grip, still embedded in the monster's flesh. The titan stumbled, off balance, and crashed to its knees. The ground shook. Kael felt something break inside him. Not a bone. Something deeper. A door. A surge of energy ripped through his body, hot and cold at once. His vision went white. Then red. Then a blinding, searing pain exploded from his left elbow. He heard the snap of cartilage grinding against bone, felt his own skin split like wet paper. Something was pushing out from inside him. A jagged spike of bone, white and glistening with blood, erupted from his elbow joint. It was a foot long, sharp as a spearhead, and it throbbed with a life of its own. Kael screamed. Not in pain, but in horror. He was mutating. Becoming a monster. The titan lunged, its maw descending. But Kael's body moved on instinct. His left arm shot up, the bone spike aimed true. The titan's own momentum drove the spike deep into its eye socket, a soft, vulnerable spot where the tumors had not grown. Black ichor sprayed. The titan convulsed, a shuddering, violent spasm that lasted 3 heartbeats. Then it went still, its massive corpse collapsing onto the rubble, inches from Kael's face. He had killed it. A nameless grunt with a rusty sword and a bone growing out of his arm. The pain receded. The bone spike began to retract, sliding back into his elbow with a wet, grinding sound. Kael gasped, his body shaking uncontrollably. He looked down at his arm. The skin had sealed, leaving only a faint scar and a strange, hard lump under the flesh. And then he saw it. A window of pale blue light, hovering in the air before his eyes. Letters of fire and crystal, impossible and real. Mutation arbitrage initiated. Level up, Private Kael level 2. Mutation acquired, bones back left elbow. Analysis, strategic application detected. Weapon integration successful. Kael stared, his mind reeling. The system window paused, waiting. He could feel it, a connection, a thread of power linking him to something vast and unknowable. The Plague War had given him a gift. Or a curse. He didn't know which. He only knew that the Titan was dead, and he was still alive. For now. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded. Reinforcements. Or execution squads. It didn't matter. Kael closed his eyes, the system window still burned into his retinas. He had leveled up. He had mutated. And this was only the beginning. The medic tent stank of blood, rot, and cheap spirits. Kael didn't remember being dragged there. One moment he was staring at the Titan's corpse, the system window still flickering in his vision like a ghost. The next, rough hands had him by the armpits, hauling him through mud and canvas flags. His left elbow throbbed where the bone's back had erupted and retracted, leaving only a puckered scar and a deep, aching cold. Now he was on a wooden table, his wrists and ankles bound with iron chains. The tent was dim, lit by a single oil lantern that swung from a pole, casting long shadows that danced like hungry things. Two soldiers stood guard at the entrance, their faces pale beneath their helmets. Neither looked at him directly. They were afraid. Good. Let them be. Through the canvas, he heard voices. Commanders. Their words were muffled at first, then sharp as a blade. The thing killed the Titan. With its elbow. I saw it. That's not possible. A grunt with a rusty sword. I don't care what's possible. His arm changed. Grew something. It's a mutation. His blade touched. Then we cut him open. Find out how it works. Maybe we can weaponize it. Or we chain him to a post outside the next Titan attack. See if his blood attracts them. Lures them in. Kael's breath caught. They were going to dissect him. Or use him as bait. Either way, he was dead. He survived the Titan, survived his own body turning against him, only to be butchered by the man he fought beside. He tested the chains. Iron. Old, but solid. The cuffs bit into his wrists, drawing blood. He flexed his left arm, feeling the cold deep in the bone. The bone's back. It had saved him once. Could it save him again? The system had said mutation arbitrage initiated. Every mutation served a strategic purpose. The spike was a weapon. And weapons cut chains. He focused, willing the bone to grow. Pain lanced through his elbow, white hot and electric. His vision blurred. The scar split open, and the spike punched through, glistening wet with his own blood. It was longer this time, sharper, a jagged shard of calcium and rage. The guards at the entrance saw it. One screamed. The other fumbled for his sword. Kael didn't wait. He brought his left arm down on the chain binding his right wrist. The spike sheared through the iron like it was wet paper. The chain fell away. He did the same for his ankles, the spike scraping against bone as he twisted, each cut a symphony of agony and freedom. The first guard charged, sword raised. Kael rolled off the table, landing on his feet. The spike was still out, still hungry. He ducked under the swing and drove the spike into the guard's throat. It punched through flesh and cartilage, hot blood spraying across Kael's face. The guard gurgled, dropped his sword, and collapsed. The second guard ran. Kael led him. He didn't have time for more corpses. He stumbled out of the tent into the night. The camp was chaos, soldiers shouting, tents burning in the distance, the sky painted orange by some unseen fire. No one noticed him. He was just another shadow in the apocalypse. He ran. His boots squelched in mud, his lungs burned, his left arm throbbed with every heartbeat. The forest swallowed him whole, branches clawing at his face, roots tripping his feet. He didn't stop until the camp was a distant glow behind him, until the only sounds were his own ragged breathing and the rustle of leaves. He collapsed against a tree, sliding down until he was sitting in the damp earth. The bone's back retracted, sinking back into his elbow with a wet crunch. He stared at his hands. They were shaking. They were covered in blood. His blood. A guard's blood. The Titan's blood. He was a freak. A monster. The army would hunt him now. The Inquisition would want him. And somewhere out there, the plague was still spreading, still spawning titans that could crush him like a bug. But he was alive. And the system was still there, pausing at the edge of his vision, waiting for his next kill, his next level, his next mutation. He didn't know if he was grateful or terrified. A twig snapped. Kael's head snapped up. He scanned the darkness, his pulse hammering. Nothing. Just the wind. Just the trees. But then he saw it. A figure, cloaked in green, standing motionless between two oaks. Watching him. The figure raised a hand to its ear, and Kael heard the faint whisper of a communicator. We found the unstable one. Sending coordinates now. The figure melted back into the shadows, leaving Kael alone in the dark, his heart pounding, his back aching to emerge again. The needle slid into Kael's neck before he could react. A cold liquid spread through his veins, numbing the edge where the bone's back had retracted. He tried to move, but leather straps held him to a wooden table. The tent smelled of herbs and blood. A woman stepped into view. She had sharp features and dark hair tied in a severe bun. Her eyes were calculating. You're awake. Good. The stabilizer will keep your mutations dormant for now. Kael's throat was dry. Who are you? Ilara. Leader of the Cure. We've been watching you since you escaped the Inquisition. She held up a syringe filled with his blood, taken while he was unconscious. Your blood reacts to plague flesh. It's the key to a vaccine. He strained against the straps. And if I refuse? You don't have a choice. The Empire wants you dissected. The Inquisition wants you colored. We're the only ones offering survival. She turned to a table of vials. Cooperate, and we'll keep you safe. Kael's jaw tightened. He had no leverage. Fine. The straps loosened. He sat up, rubbing his wrists. The tent held 5 other rebel scouts and medics, all armed. One was the green-cloaked scout from the forest. He met Kael's gaze and looked away. Ilara handed him a bowl of broth. Eat. We move at dusk. He ate in silence, watching her. She moved with purpose, directing her people with quiet authority. But her eyes kept returning to him, studying him like a specimen. An hour later, a horn blast shattered the camp's calm. Plague beast! Someone screamed. Kael dropped the bowl. The ground trembled. Through the tent flap, he saw it, a hulking mass of twisted flesh and bone, 15 feet tall, with a gaping maw lined with obsidian teeth. Its skin wiped green pus. Ilara grabbed a crossbow. Everyone to defensive positions. Protect the samples. She glanced at Kael. Stay inside. He didn't listen. He grabbed a rusted sword from a fallen rebel and ran out. The beast had already impaled 2 fighters on its forelimbs. The rebels fired arrows, but they bounced off its hide. Kael charged. The beast swung a claw. He ducked, rolled, and slashed its ankle. The blade barely scratched it. The beast roared and stomped. He jumped back, heart pounding. Then it happened. A surge of energy coursed through him. The world slowed. A translucent blue panel flickered in his vision. Level up. Level 3. Mutation in progress. His left eye burned. Black fluid wiped from the corner, streaming down his cheek. The pain was blinding. He clutched his face, screaming. When he opened his eye, the world had changed. The beast's body was covered in faint, pulsing red lines with points. A crack in its ribcage. A soft spot behind its knee. The gap between its neck vertebrae. He saw them all. Its neck. He yelled. Aim for the gap between the 3rd and 4th vertebrae. Ilara stared at him, then barked orders. The rebels adjusted their aim. A volley of bolts struck the beast's neck. It staggered. Kael ran forward. The beast swung at him. He slid under the claw, came up beneath its chin, and drove his sword into the soft tissue. The blade sank deep. Black blood gushed over him. The beast shuddered. Its legs buckled. It crashed to the ground, twitching, then still. Silence. The rebel stared at Kael, covered in black ichor, his left eye still weeping dark fluid. He wiped his face, but the tears kept coming. Elara approached slowly. Her crossbow hung at her side. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held a glint of hunger. Not gratitude. Greed. Your mutation, she whispered. You can see their weaknesses. Kael's eyes stopped weeping. The panel faded. He looked at her, and for a moment, he saw her weakness to the flicker of desperation behind her calm. She would use him. Betray him. He knew it. But for now, he was alive. The morning after the plague beast's death, the rebel camp stirred with uneasy hope. Kael sat on a crate near the fire pit, his left eye still weeping a thin, milky fluid. The weak point side had faded, but the socket ached with a phantom pressure. He flexed his third arm, still clumsy, still a grotesque appendage that made him want to vomit. But it was his. And it had saved them. Elara moved among her people, her face a mask of calm authority. She had not met his gaze since the battle. Kael didn't blame her. He had seen the way she looked at him like a tool that might shatter at any moment. Then the ground trembled. At first, Kael thought it was aftershocks from the beast's death throes. But the rhythm was wrong, too steady, too deliberate. Hoofbeats. Many of them. A scout burst through the tree line, his face pale. Inquisition. They're coming. Elara's hand went to her sword. How many? 20 riders. Led by Commander Voss himself. Kael stood, his bones back scraping against the crate. The name meant nothing to him, but the rebels' faces told him everything. They looked like men who had seen a ghost. The riders emerged from the forest mist in perfect formation. Black armor, crimson cloaks, and helms shaped like snarling hounds. At their head rode a man whose armor was etched with gold, Commander Voss. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his boots crunching on the ash-covered ground. His eyes swept the camp and landed on Kael. There he is. Elara stepped forward, hand still on her hilt. Commander Voss. This camp is under the protection of the Cure. You have no authority here. Voss left a dry, scraping sound. The Cure? You mean the band of traitors who think they can bargain with the plague? He gestured to Kael. That thing is Imperial property. The Emperor has declared him a divine weapon. I'm here to collect. Kael's blood ran cold. I'm not a weapon. You don't get a choice, mutant. Voss snapped his fingers, and 2 Inquisitors flanked him, chains clinking at their belts. Kael's third arm twitched. His left eye began to weep again, and the world shifted. He saw the weak points on the nearest Inquisitors, a chink in the knee joint, a hairline crack in a breastplate. His bones back ached to strike. I'm not going with you, Kael said. Voss said. Then I'll take you by force. He moved faster than a man his size should. Kael barely dodged the first swing of Voss's mace, the wind of it ruffling his hair. He rolled, came up with his bones back extended, and drove it into the thigh of an Inquisitor who tried to flank him. The man screamed, dropping his sword. Kael's third arm grabbed the fallen blade. He spun, using the weak point side to find the seam in another Inquisitor's gorget. The tip of the sword punched through, and the man gurgled, collapsing. For a moment, Kael thought he might actually win. The rebels were rallying, drawing weapons, forming a line. Then Voss was behind him. Kael felt the mace slam into his ribs before he heard the crack. He flew sideways, crashing into a tent pole. The canvas collapsed around him. He struggled to rise, but Voss was already there, one boot on his chest, pressing down until his lungs screamed. Impressive, Voss said, his voice almost admiring. You got 3 arms and an eye that sees through steel. But you're still just a Grunt plain soldier. Kael looked past Voss's shoulder. Elara stood frozen, her sword half drawn. Her eyes met his, and he saw the calculation in them, the weighing of lives, the cost of defiance. She sheathed her sword. Take him, she said quietly. In exchange for amnesty. For all of us. Kael's heart stopped. Elara. She wouldn't look at him. I'm sorry, Kael. But you're not worth the war. Voss laughed again, stepping off Kael's chest. 2 Inquisitors hauled him to his knees. Voss produced a color-black iron, etched with runes that glowed with sickly green light. He clicked it around Kael's neck. The effect was immediate. Kael felt his mutations go quiet. like a fire smothered by wet ash. The system that had whispered to him since the first level up went silent. His third arm hung limp. His weeping eye dried up. What did you do? Kael rasped. Voss leaned in close, his breath hot against Kael's ear. That color suppresses your system. No more leveling. No more mutations. You're just a man, not a strong one, maybe, but just a man. He straightened. You belong to the Empire now, monster. Kael tried to move, but his body felt hollow, disconnected. The Inquisitors dragged him toward a waiting horse. The rebels watched in silence. Ilara had turned her back. The last thing Kael saw before they threw a hood over his head was the smoldering ruin of the camp, and the faces of people he had saved, now too afraid to even meet his gaze. The iron gate slammed shut behind Kael with a reverberating clang, sealing him inside a circular arena of packed sand and blood-stained stone. Above, tier upon tier of Imperial citizens roared, their faces twisted with hunger for spectacle. Torches guttered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the Colosseum walls, where frescoes of past hunts depicted heroes slaying chimeras and hydras. The air reeked of offal, cheap wine, and the metallic tang of old blood. Kael stumbled forward, the suppression collar coat and tight around his throat. Its runes pulsed with a dull blue light, leaching the warmth from his skin. He flexed his left arm, feeling only the dead weight of the bone spike, no resonance, no power. His right shoulder ached where the third arm had once been, now a withered stump beneath his tunic. The weeping eye on his forehead was sealed shut, a scarred slit leaking only tears. He was a cripple in a cage. A herald's voice boomed across the arena, magically amplified, people of the Empire. Behold the mutant, the freak who slays titans with flesh grown from his own sin. The crowd jeered. A rotten tomato splattered against Kael's cheek. He wiped it away, tasting salt and filth. His heart hammered, but his mind was cold, calculating. He had survived the front lines. He had killed a titan. He would not die for their amusement. On the far side of the arena, a second gate groaned open. From the darkness came a low, guttural hiss, followed by the scraping of claws on stone. The crowd fell silent, then erupted into frenzied cheers. It emerged slowly, a nightmare of scale and sinew. The Hydra Titan stood 12 feet at the shoulder, its body a grotesque fusion of serpent and lizard, covered in weeping sores and chitinous plates. 3 heads rose from its neck, each one a different horror, one with a single blazing eye, one with a gaping maw lined with rows of teeth, and one that dripped green venom from its fangs. The beast's tail lashed, spiked and barbed. Kael's throat went dry. His system flickered in his peripheral vision, a grayed-out interface, locked by the collar. He couldn't level. He couldn't mutate. He was just a man with a useless bone spike and a weeping eye. Fight or die, mutant! The herald bellowed. The Hydra charged. Kael dove laughed, rolling across the sand as the central head snapped at where he stood. The venomous head spat a stream of acid that sizzled against the stone floor, leaving a smoking crater. The crowd gasped and laughed. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing a discarded gladius from a pile of bones near the wall. The blade was chipped, the hilt slick with grease. It would have to do. The Hydra circled, its 3 heads weaving in a hypnotic dance. The single-eyed head tracked his movements with unnerving precision. The maw-headed one drooled. The venomous one hissed. Kael's mind raced. The color suppressed his mutations, but it didn't suppress his instincts. He had fought titans before. He knew their patterns. They were aggressive, relentless, but predictable. The Hydra would lunge, then recall, then strike again. He needed to survive long enough to find a weakness. It lunged. The maw-headed beast came first, jaws wide. Kael sidestepped and slashed, the gladius biting into its neck, but the wound was shallow. The beast roared, shaking its head, and the single-eyed head followed with a blinding beam of light. Kael threw himself flat, the beam searing the air above him. He was on his back, scrambling, when the venomous head struck. He twisted, and the fangs caught his left shoulder instead of his throat. Pain exploded through his arm, white-hot and burning. The venom seeped into his blood, and his vision swam. The crowd cheered louder. Kael screamed, not in fear, but in rage. He drove the gladius into the Hydra's neck, twisting, and the beast recoiled, tearing the blade from his hand. He was unarmed, poisoned, and bleeding. And then he felt it, a crack in the color's suppression. The venom, coursing through his veins, was reacting with the plague residue still in his system. It was a volatile cocktail, destabilizing the runes. The color hummed, flickered, and emitted a shrill whine. His system flickered back to life. Level up available. Kill the Hydra Titan to trigger evolution. Kael's lips peeled back in a bloody grin. You want a mutant? He snarled. I'll give you a monster. He charged. The Hydra met him head-on, all three heads striking at once. Kael ducked under the maw, leaped over the beam, and took the venomous headbutt on his right arm. The fangs sank deep, but he didn't stop. He grabbed the beast's lower jaw with his left hand, bones back digging into its flesh, and pulled himself closer. With a final, desperate heave, Kael drove his forehead into the single eye of the central head. The eyeball burst, spraying ichor, and the Hydra screamed a deafening, multi-tone shriek. It staggered. Kael fell, rolled, and grabbed the gladius from the sand. He plunged it into the base of the Hydra's neck, severing the spinal column. The beast collapsed, twitching, its heads thrashing in their death throes. Level up. A wave of heat erupted from Kael's core. The color shattered, its pieces clattering to the sand. His right shoulder burned, and he felt something tear through flesh and cloth. A new arm burst forth, slick with amniotic fluid and blood, reaching out with fingers that twitched and grasped. The crowd fell silent. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap. Kael looked up. The Emperor stood from his throne, high above the arena, his face unreadable. He raised a hand, and the herald's voice boomed. The Emperor commands the collar be removed. The mutant is his champion. Kael's new arm flexed, fingers curling into a fist. He looked down at the Hydra's corpse, then at his three hands. He had survived. He had leveled. He had grown. But as the gates opened and the guards approached, he knew this was not freedom. It was a new cage, gilded and blood-soaked. The Emperor's champion. The Empire's weapon. And the next mutation could be his last. The suite was gilded, draped in silks that whispered of wealth, but to Kael, it was a cage. Marble floors reflected the flickering lamplight, and the bed was soft enough to swallow a man whole, yet the door had no handle from the inside. He sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at his hands. Free hands. The third arm sprouted from his right shoulder blade, a grotesque limb of sinew and bone that twitched with its own nervous energy. He flexed its fingers, watching them curl and uncurl. A weapon. A curse. A leash. A knock came, not at the door, but from the wall. A section of it slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. A man stepped out, old and stooped, his robes stained with strange chemicals. He carried a lantern that burned green. Master Eldrick, he said, his voice dry as parchment. Imperial alchemist. The Emperor sends his regards, and his leash. Kael stood, his three arms spreading instinctively. I'm not a dog. No, you're a specimen, Eldrick replied, setting the lantern on a table. That color you wore, it wasn't just suppressing your mutations. It was leaching a slow poison into your bloodstream. A paralytic agent designed to keep you compliant. The Hydra's venom burned it out, but the residue remains. Without treatment, your nervous system will degrade within the month. Kael's jaw tightened. Why tell me? Because I need you alive, Eldrick said, pulling a vial from his robes. I've spent decades studying the plague. The Emperor wants weapons. I want a cure. Your blood carries a primordial strain of variant that predates the common plague. It reacts violently to plague flesh, which is why you can kill titans. But it's unstable. Mutations spiral out of control. I can stabilize you, slow the decay, in exchange for your cooperation. Cooperation. Kael's third arm clenched into a fist. You mean dissection? I mean research, Eldrick said, uncorking the vial. A sweet, acrid smell filled the room. Blood samples. Tissue biopsies. Controlled mutation triggers. I'll teach you to control your transformations, and in return, I learn how to synthesize a vaccine. The Emperor gets his weapon. The people get a cure. You get to live. Kael stared at the vial. His weeping eye, still weeping from the socket, saw the truth in Eldrick's aura, a flicker of genuine hope buried beneath ambition. What's in the vial? A stabilizer. It will bind to the primordial strain and slow your mutation rate. Drink it, and we begin. Kael took the vial. The liquid was thick, like mercury, and cold. He downed it in one swallow. A chill spread through his chest, numbing the constant ache in his bones. For a moment, he felt almost normal. Then Eldrick gestured to a metal table covered in instruments. Now, we test. I need to see how your body reacts to controlled stimuli. Place your left arm here. Kael obeyed. Eldrick took a scalpel and made a shallow cut on Kael's forearm. Blood welled up, black and thick. Eldrick dabbed it onto a glass slide, then added a drop of plague-tinted serum. The blood sizzled, turning to steam. Fascinating. The reaction is immediate. Your body treats the common plague as a foreign invader and attacks it with extreme prejudice. But the collateral damage, he gestured to Kael's third arm, is unpredictable. A sharp pain lanced through Kael's chest. His lungs burned, as if filled with acid. He doubled over, coughing. A mist of green vapor erupted from his mouth, splashing across the lab table. The metal hissed, warped, and melted into a pool of slag. Kael staggered back, gasping. His throat felt raw, scorched. Eldrick's eyes widened. He grabbed a pair of tongs and poked at the molten remains of the table. Your lungs, they mutated. You're secreting acid mist. This is beyond my control. Kael wiped his mouth. His hand came away bloody. What does that mean? It means the stabilizer is failing, Eldrick whispered. Or rather, your body is adapting faster than I anticipated. The primordial strain is rewriting your biology in real time. I can slow it, but I cannot stop it. Every level, every mutation, brings you closer to a final, fatal transformation. Kael looked at his free hands. The third arm flexed, eager. Then I'll just have to level up carefully. There is no careful, Eldrick said, his voice trembling. You are a walking apocalypse, Kael. And I just made you stronger. The sweet silk curtains did little to muffle the distant roar of the Colosseum crowd, still drunk on blood. Kael sat on the edge of the gilded bed, staring at his third arm. It hung limp from his right shoulder, the skin a mottled gray, the fingers twitching with a life of their own. The stabilizer Eldrick had given him was a lie, a temporary bandage on a wound that kept splitting open. His lungs burned, a faint acidic tang rising in his throat every time he exhaled. A soft click from the balcony door made him freeze. He reached for the bones bag on his left elbow, but a familiar voice hissed through the darkness. Don't. It's me. Ilara slipped through the gap, her rebel leathers stained with mud and dried blood. Her face was gaunt, shadows pulling under her eyes. She moved like a wraith, closing the distance before Kael could rise. They're hunting me. The Inquisition knows I was part of the cure. Then why are you here? Kael's voice came out rough, the acid mist curling from his lips. He forced it back down, his throat burning. To save you from yourself, she whispered, pressing a small vial into his palm. The liquid inside was a deep amber, swirling with flecks of gold. The Emperor plans to use you as a suicide bomb. They'll strap you with plague-infected shrapnel and drop you into the Titan hive. Your mutations will react with the plague heart, and you'll detonate like a living bomb. Kael's stomach clenched. He looked at the vial. What is this? An antidote. A real one. It's made from stabilized primordial strain blood. Yours, actually. I stole it from Eldrick's lab before I fled. It'll suppress your mutations for a few hours, give you control. He wanted to believe her. But memories of her betrayal when she sold him out for amnesty burned like fresh wounds. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only one left who doesn't want you dead or weaponized, she said, her voice cracking. The rebels are scattered. The Inquisition wants to dissect you. The Emperor wants to turn you into a bomb. I want you to live, Kael. Even if it means I die. A heavy silence settled between them. The third arm twitched, fingers scraping against the silk sheets. Kael made a decision. He uncorked the vial and drank. The liquid was thick, coating his throat like honey, and then a wave of cold spread through his chest. The burning in his lungs receded. The third arm went still. For the first time in days, his body felt like his own. "We have to move," Ilara said, pulling him toward the balcony. The guard rotation changes in 3 minutes. They slipped into the night, the cold air biting at Kael's skin. The palace gardens were a maze of hedges and statues, but Ilara navigated them with practiced ease. They reached a side gate, rusted and overgrown with ivy. Ilara pulled a key from her belt, but before she could unlock it, a heavy boot slammed against the iron. "Going somewhere, freak!" Commander Voss stepped out of the shadows, his silver armor gleaming under the moon. Behind him, a dozen Inquisitors fanned out, crossbows trained on Kael's chest. Kael didn't hesitate. His third arm snapped out, fingers wrapping around a loose cobblestone. He hurled it with unnatural force, striking the nearest Inquisitor in the helmet. The man crumpled. Ilara lunged at Voss, a dagger flashing in her hand, but Voss caught her wrist and twisted, forcing her to her knees. "The antidote was a nice touch," Voss said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But it won't save you. The Emperor wants you alive, but he didn't say intact." Kael felt the cold spreading through his veins, the antidote working, but also numbing his limbs. His third arm twitched again, but this time it wasn't still. It spasmed, the fingers curling into a fist, then opening, then curling again. The antidote was failing. "Run!" Ilara gasped, blood trickling from her lip. "Kael, run!" He didn't. He stepped forward, his third arm rising, the muscles bulging. "Let her go." Voss laughed. "Or what? You'll cough on me." Kael opened his mouth and breathed. A cloud of acid mist erupted from his lungs, burning the air. The Inquisitors screamed, dropping their crossbows as the mist ate through their armor. Voss shielded his face, his gauntlets smoking. In that moment, Ilara wrenched free, kicking Voss in the knee. He stumbled. They ran. The gate burst open under Kael's shoulder, and they spilled into the alley beyond. The city was a maze of narrow streets and leaning tenements. They ran until Kael's legs gave out, collapsing against a wall. Ilara knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she checked his pulse. "The antidote," she muttered. "It's not enough. Your body is rejecting it." Kael looked down at his third arm. It was twitching violently now, the skin splitting at the elbow, revealing glistening muscle and bone. A new growth was pushing through a fourth arm. No. It was something else. Something worse. The arm began to twist, the fingers elongating into claws, the joints reversing. Kael screamed as the mutation took hold, his vision blurring. Ilara grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Stay with me. I'll find a way to stabilize you. Just don't." Her words faded as Kael's world went dark. The cathedral's shadow swallowed them whole. Kael stumbled through the gap where the iron gate had rusted from its hinges, his breath ragged, his third arm scraping against the stone archway. The clawed fingers left grooves in the ancient rock, and a low, wet growl rumbled from the thing's palm, a sound that did not belong to him. Ilara shoved the gate shut behind them, wedging a broken pew against it. Her hands trembled as she pressed her ear to the iron, listening. The distant howl of Inquisitor hounds faded into the rain-slit silence of the nave. "We have minutes," she whispered, turning. Her eyes fell on his third arm, which had twisted itself into a knot, the claws scraping against his own ribs. "It's getting worse." Kael bit down on a scream. The arm did not obey him. It moved with a will of its own, jerking toward every shadow that flickered in the candlelight from the altar's dying flame. A rat scurried across the broken floor. The arm lunged, missing by inches, embedding its claws in the flagstone. "It's hunting," he gasped, tearing the arm free. Black ichor dripped from the gouges in the stone. "It thinks everything is prey." Ilara knelt, opening her satchel. Vials clinked. She pulled out a length of silver wire and a small, leather-bound book, the pages yellowed, written in a script that seemed to write when he looked directly at it. "There is a ritual. Eldred taught me, but he warned me never to use it. It binds the consciousness of a mutation by sacrificing life force." "How much?" "Enough." She did not meet his eyes. That was answer enough. Kael slumped against a pillar, the third arm thrashing, trying to reach the shadows pulling in the corner. The weeping eye on his cheek was dry. It had sealed shut days ago, leaving only a scar. He had felt blind without it. But now, as the arm fought him, he wished he could be blind to the way his own body betrayed him. "Do it," he said. Illyria unwound the silver wire, looping it around the base of the third arm where it sprouted from his shoulder blade. The arm howled a sound that came from Kael's throat but was not his voice. The wire burned, and the scent of charred flesh filled the cathedral. She began to chant. The words were guttural, old. The candle on the altar flickered and died. Darkness pressed in, and Kael felt something cold pass through him, a presence that was not Illyria, not him. The arm thrashed harder, cracking ribs. He tasted blood. Illyria's voice cracked. Her skin paled, the veins on her forehead darkening. She was giving too much. Kael tried to pull away, but the wire held him fast. "Don't stop," she hissed. "Or it takes you both." Pain erupted in his shoulder. The arm convulsed, then went limp. The clawed fingers curled inward, and for the first time in days, Kael felt the limb as his own, heavy, scarred, but silent. He flexed the fingers. They obeyed. Illyria collapsed beside him, her breath shallow. Her hair had turned white at the temples. "It's bound," she whispered. "But the cost. I won't be able to do that again." Kael helped her sit up, his good hand on her back. "Thank you." She nodded, too exhausted to speak. Then the pain hit him as back behind his eyes, a tearing sensation along his cheek. The scar split open. The weeping eye returned, blinking, and the world snapped into a new spectrum. The cathedral was no longer dark. It was drowned in light, pale green auras that rose from the floor, the walls, the bones of the dead buried beneath the stones. He saw the plague aura. It was everywhere. A thin film of it coated every surface, but deep beneath the altar, a massive concentration pulsed like a heartbeat. The light throbbed, rhythmic, sickening. "Illyria," he said, his voice hollow. "There's something below us." He stood, the weeping eye guiding him. He walked to the altar, pushed aside the rotted cloth, and found a trapdoor, iron rings, rusted, set into the stone. The aura blazed through the cracks. She joined him, her hand on his shoulder. "What is it?" "The source." He pulled the trapdoor open. A staircase spiraled into darkness, and from the depths came a wet, pulsing sound. A heartbeat. Slow. Heavy. Long. They descended. The stairs ended in a crypt, the walls lined with sarcophagi that had been cracked open from the inside. At the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling by chains of bone and sinew, hung a plague heart. It was the size of a war drum, slit with blood fluid, its surface a mesh of veins and arteries that pulsed in unison. The air was thick with the smell of rot and copper. The heart beat, and the walls trembled. Kael's third arm twitched, but held still. His weeping eye showed him the truth. This was the heart of the region's Titan infestation. Kill it, and the Titans would starve. Illyria stared, her face pale in the green glow. "We need to destroy it. We need to survive first," Kael said, but his hand was already reaching for the blade at his hip. The heart beat again. Faster. The plague heart pulsed like a diseased drum, its rhythm shaking the crypt's stone floor. Kael's weeping eye flared, painting the organ in sickly green auras, concentrated corruption that made his teeth ache. Illyria stumbled back, a hand pressed to her chest, her breath ragged from the ritual's toll. "It's summoning something," she whispered. The walls cracked. From the fissures poured plates, spawned twisted humanoid shapes with too many limbs, their skin slick with black ichor. They moved in a wave, claws scraping against stone, mouths gaping with concentric rings of teeth. Kael didn't think. He inhaled, and his lungs burned. Acid lungs. The air in his chest turned to liquid fire, and when he exhaled, a spray of corrosive mist engulfed the front line of spawn. Their flesh sizzled, bubbling and sloughing off bone. They collapsed, twitching, but more poured through. "They keep coming," Illyria shouted, drawing a dagger from her belt. She sliced at a spawn that lunged too close, her blade carving through its neck. Black blood splattered her face, but she didn't flinch. Kael's third arm twitched, its hostile consciousness straining against the silver wire bindings. He forced it still, focusing on the fight. He punched a spawn in the chest, his bone spike punching through its sternum. The creature shrieked, then dissolved into sludge. But the plague heart pulsed again, and the spawn regenerated. Limbs reknit, wounds sealed. The crypt was a meat grinder, and they were the grist. We have to destroy the heart. Illyria yelled, parrying a close strike. It's the source. Kael's mind raced. His weeping eye showed him the heart's weak point, a crevice in its membrane where the pulse was thinnest. But every time he tried to close the distance, Spawn blocked his path. He killed 3, then 5, then 10. His arms ached. His lungs burned with acid he couldn't spare. As Spawn tackled him, its weight slamming him against a pillar. He headbutted it, cracking its skull, then shoved it off. As he staggered upright, a new sensation rippled through his ribs, a hot, crawling itch. The mutation arbitrage. He was leveling up. His left rib cage shifted. One rib detached from his sternum, floating free beneath his skin. Pain lanced through him, but he gritted his teeth. The bone elongated, sharpened, and pushed outward. He reached up, gripped the protruding end, and pulled. The rib slid out with a wet, grinding sound. It was a foot-long speck of white bone, its tip needle-sharp. A bone javelin. Illyria stared, her eyes wide. What did you just? No time. Kael cocked his arm back, the javelin balanced in his grip. The Spawn rushed him, but he ignored them. His weeping eye locked onto the heart's crevice. He threw. The javelin flew true, a white blur against the green gloom. It struck the heart's weak point, punching through the membrane. Black ichor gushed. The heart convulsed, its pulse stuttering. For a second, the Spawn froze. Then the heart exploded. A shockwave of pure plague energy blasted outward, throwing Kael off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his skull cracking against stone. The world went white, then black. When he woke, he was lying on cold metal. A cell. Chains bit into his wrists. His chest felt like raw. He looked down. His third arm was gone, severed at the shoulder, the stump wrapped in bandages. A figure stood over him, silhouetted against a lantern's glow. Tall. Armored. The emblem of the Emperor's Inquisition on his breastplate. Commander Voss. You destroyed the heart, Voss said, his voice flat, clinical. But you are still a weapon. The Emperor has a new mission. Kael tried to move, but his body was lead. His weeping eye flickered, showing him the plague auras around Voss faint, but present. The commander was infected. Or carrying something. Where is Illyria? Kael's voice was a rasp. Voss didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The cell door slammed shut, leaving Kael in darkness, along with the phantom ache of his missing arm and the weight of the Emperor's chains. The cell stank of mildew and old blood. Kael lay on the cold stone floor, his shoulder raw, pulsing ache where his third arm had been torn away. The bandages were crusted with black and red, and the stump throbbed with every heartbeat. He stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the mortar to keep from screaming. Commander Voss stood at the cell door, his polished armor gleaming under the torchlight. He was a tall man, gaunt, with eyes like chips of ice. A suppressing collar was locked around Kael's neck, humming with a low, constant vibration that dulled his mutations. The bone spike at his elbow felt like a dead tooth, and the weeping eye on his palm was sealed shut. You're awake, Voss said. His voice was flat, clinical. Good. The Emperor has a new mission for you. Kael didn't move. I'm done being your weapon. Voss smiled, a thin, cruel line. You think you have a choice? The plague heart you destroyed was a seedling. The true source is in the fungal wastes, a continent consumed by the plague. The Emperor wants you to lead a suicide squad to destroy it. Kael sat up slowly, the movement sending fire through his shoulder. And if I refuse? Then Illyria dies. Voss pulled a crumpled piece of cloth from his belt, a scrap of Illyria's cloak, stained with blood. She's in a cell beneath the Colosseum. The Emperor has ordered her execution at dawn if you don't cooperate. Kael's blood ran cold. He remembered Illyria's face in the crypt, her eyes wide with fear as the Spawn closed in. She had saved his life, and he had repaid her by being captured. Let her go. She's innocent. No one is innocent, Voss said. But if you succeed, the Emperor will grant her amnesty. She'll be free to leave the Empire. Kael's mind raced. He couldn't trust Voss, but he couldn't let Illyria die. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning Voss's armor. The weak point side flickered to life, a faint glow in his sealed palm. He focused, and the world shifted. Cracks appeared in the stone walls, weak points in the mortar. He looked at Voss, and his breath caught. There, at the joint of Voss's left pauldron, was a hairline fracture in the magical shield that encased his armor. A tiny flaw, barely visible, but it was there. A well-placed strike could shatter the shield and leave Voss vulnerable. "I'll do it," Kael said, his voice steady. "But I have conditions." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Name them." "I want Ilara released before I leave. And I want a new sword, a grey sword, forged from Titan bone." Voss laughed. "A grey sword? Your third arm is gone. You can barely hold a dagger." "It will grow back," Kael said. "And when it does, I'll need a bigger sword." Voss's smile faded. He studied Kael for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll have the armorer prepare a blade. But if you try anything, Ilara dies before you take your first step." He turned and walked away, the cell door slamming shut. The lock clicked, and Kael was alone. He lay back on the stone, his heart pounding. The stump on his shoulder itched, and he felt a faint warmth spreading through the scar tissue. He looked down, and his eyes widened. A tiny knob of bone was pushing through the bandages, covered in a thin layer of pink skin. His third arm was regrowing. Kael grinned, a savage, desperate smile. "I'll need a bigger sword." The iron gate groaned open, and Kael stepped into the yard, the suppressing color cold against his throat. Before him stood a dozen men and women, their eyes hollow or wild, their bodies marked by scars and crude tattoos. They were the dregs of the Colosseum's dungeons, murderers, thieves, and one plague-touched berserker named Grunt, whose left arm was wrapped in rusted chains to contain its spasms. Commander Voss stood on a raised platform, his voice cutting through the morning mist. "This is Private Kael. He's your commander. You follow his orders, or you die in the fungal wastes. Any questions?" No one spoke. A woman with a missing ear spat on the ground. A man with a brand on his cheek stared at Kael's stump, where the third arm was slowly regrowing, a knob of bone and sinew pushing through the scar tissue. Kael didn't waste words. He walked to the armory rack and hefted the Titan bone grey sword, a weapon as tall as his chest, its edge serrated with fossilized teeth. The weight felt right. He turned to the squad. "We march in 10 minutes. Eat, drink, and say your prayers if you have them." They moved without enthusiasm. Grunt shuffled forward, his chains clinking. "You're the freak who blew up the nest," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They say you got a third arm once." Kael met his gaze. "It's growing back." Grunt grinned, revealing teeth filed to points. "Good. I like freaks." The march into the fungal wastes began under a gray sky. The ground turned spongy, choked with pale mycelium that crunched underfoot. Spores floated in the air like snow, settling on exposed skin and burning like acid. The squad wrapped their faces in rags, but Kael's acid lungs filtered the air, though each breath tasted of rot. By the third hour, they reached the first Titan tracks, massive craters filled with oozing black slime. The trees around them were dead, their bark peeled back to reveal networks of glowing fungi. The squad tightened their formation. "It's close," Kael said, his weeping eye twitching. Through it, he saw the faint heat signatures of life, but also something else, a cloud of spores that moved with purpose, swirling like a living thing. Then the ground erupted. The spore titan rose from beneath the mycelium, a mountain of bloated flesh and fungal growths. Its body was covered in pustules that burst on contact, releasing clouds of yellow spores. It had no eyes, only a gaping maw lined with tendrils that lashed out blindly. Kael raised his grey sword. "Spread out. Don't let it surround you." The squad scattered, but the titan's tendrils caught two men, dragging them into its maw. Their screams were cut short as the creature chewed, spores spewing from its mouth. Kael charged, swinging the great sword at a leg. The blade bit deep, but the wound sealed instantly, fungal threads knitting the flesh back together. The titan retaliated with a sweep of its arm, sending Kael flying into a dead tree. His ribs cracked, and the color died into his throat, suppressing the mutation that might have saved him. He gasped, struggling to breathe. The spore clouds were thickening, blinding him. His acid lungs were useless, the spores were too fine, too numerous. He needed something else. Then the system flared in his mind. "Level up, 7. A searing pain erupted in his forehead, just above his weeping eye. The skin split, and a new eye pushed through, its pupil a swirling vortex of green. The world shifted. He could see the spores now not as a cloud, but as patterns, currents of air and intent. The Titan was steering them, guiding the wind with its breath. Third eye, spore vision activated. Kael rose, ignoring the blood streaming down his face. He saw the Titan's core a pulsing knot of fungal matter deep within its chest, shielded by layers of spore-laden muscle. The pattern was clear: strike there, and the creature would collapse. Grunt! He shouted. Follow my lead. Grunt was already fighting, his chained arm swinging a mace that shattered pustules on impact. He turned, his eyes wild. What do you see? The core. Kael pointed with his great sword. 3 o'clock, under the third rib of its chest. I'll clear the path. Kael sprinted forward, using his spore vision to dodge the worst of the clouds. He swung the great sword in a wide arc, severing a tendril that lashed at his face. Then he dropped low and drove the blade into the Titan's knee joint, forcing it to kneel. Grunt roared, charging with his mace raised high. He leaped onto the Titan's back, chains flying, and drove the weapon into the core. The impact sent a shockwave through the creature, and it let out a wet, gurgling scream. The spores in the air began to fall, inert. The Titan collapsed, its body dissolving into a pool of black ichor and fungal slime. Kael stood over the corpse, panting. His new eye throbbed, and he could feel the third arm growing faster now, the stump lengthening into a forearm. He turned to check on the squad. Only 5 remained. The others were dead, their bodies already being absorbed into the ground. Grunt stumbled toward him, his mace dragging. We did it, he said, but his voice was strained. He lifted his left arm, the one wrapped in chains. The skin was bulging, the veins black and pulsing. Kael, the spores got in. Kael's blood ran cold. He saw it through his new eye, the infection spreading up Grunt's arm, twisting the muscle, turning it into something alien. The chains began to creak as the arm swelled. Cut it off, Grunt begged, tears streaming down his face. Please. Before it takes me. Kael raised the great sword, but his hand trembled. He remembered Ilara's face, the way she had looked at him when she betrayed him. He remembered the plague heart, the way it had pulsed with a life of its own. He remembered the Emperor's words, "You are a weapon without a master." Grunt's arm burst open, a tentacle of black flesh whipping out, lashing at the air. The berserker screamed, his body convulsing. Kill me. Kael swung the great sword, but the blade stopped an inch from Grunt's neck. He couldn't do it. Not yet. Hold still, Kael said, his voice hard. He dropped the sword and grabbed Grunt's infected arm, pressing his new eye close to the wound. Through the spore vision, he saw the infections root a single tendril that had wrapped around Grunt's humerus. If he could sever it, maybe. But the tentacle lashed out again, catching Kael across the face, sending him sprawling. When he looked up, Grunt was on his knees, his body racked with spasms, the tentacle now writhing from his shoulder. The berserker's eyes met Kael's, filled with a plea that words could no longer express. I'm sorry, Kael whispered. He picked up the great sword and walked forward, the blade raised high. The tentacle struck, but Kael's new eye tracked its path. He sidestepped and brought the sword down in a clean arc, severing Grunt's arm at the shoulder. The tentacle fell to the ground, thrashing, then went still. Grunt collapsed, blood pouring from the stump. Kael tore a strip from his own shirt and tied a tourniquet around the wound. The berserker's breath was shallow, but he was alive. For now. The surviving squad members gathered around, their faces pale. The woman with the missing ear spoke. What now, Commander? Kael looked at the horizon, where the fungal waste stretched endlessly, dotted with the shapes of more titans. He touched the new eye on his forehead, feeling its strange vision pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. We keep marching, he said. And we pray the next one doesn't find us. But as he spoke, he felt the suppressing color vibrate, and a voice echoed in his skull Voss's voice. Impressive work, Private. But remember, I'm watching. And Ilara's life depends on your cooperation. Kael clenched his jaw, the great sword's hilt creaking in his grip. He would find a way to break that collar. He would find a way to save Ilara. And then, he would burn the Empire to the ground. The squad stood in a loose semicircle, their eyes fixed on Grunt. The berserker knelt in the blackened soil, his severed arm stump wrapped in a bloody tourniquet. The tentacle that had sprouted from his forearm lay twitching on the ground, a sleek, purple fin covered in spore nodules. Kael's suppressing color hummed, a constant reminder of Voss's watchful eye. His blade touched now, hissed a wiry thief named Run, her hand on her dagger. Put him down before he turns. Kael didn't move. He stared at Grunt's wound, at the way the blade flashed steel right at the edges. His own body thrummed with the memory of mutation, the bone spike, the weeping eye, the third arm. He knew that feeling, the terror of something foreign taking root. No, Kael said. I can save him. With what? Run spat. Prayers. Kael drew his belt knife. The blade caught the dim light of the fungal sky. He cut a shallow line across his palm, and blood welled up thick, dark, laced with something that shimmered like oil. The squad recoiled. They had seen what his blood did to plate flesh. The spore titan had screamed as it melted. This is the only cure I have, Kael said. He knelt beside Grunt. Trust me. Grunt's eyes were wide, pupils dilated, veins blackening at his temples. He nodded once, a jerky motion. Kael pressed his bleeding palm to the stump. The moment his blood touched the wound, steam hissed. Grunt screamed, a raw, guttural sound that echoed across the wastes. The plague tendrils in his arm recoiled, shriveling like worms on hot stone. The black veins receded, inch by inch, until Grunt's skin was pale but clean. The tentacle on the ground dissolved into a puddle of ichor. But Grunt's arm did not grow back. The stump sealed over, smooth and scarred. And where the tentacle had been, a single, thin tendril now grew from the center of the scar, no longer than a finger, pulsing with a faint purple light. Grunt stared at it, breathing hard. It's still there, he whispered. Stabilized, Kael said. It won't spread. But it's part of you now. The squad murmured. Ren's dagger was still out. You infected him, she said. Your blood is a curse. It's a leash, Kael replied. The plague can't take him while my blood's in his veins. And what happens when your blood decides to grow something else? Ren stepped closer. You're a walking experiment. We're all just lab rats to you. Kael opened his mouth to answer, but a sharp crack silenced him. A spore pod, hidden in the fungal mat beneath Ren's feet, burst open. A cloud of golden spores erupted, enveloping her. She screamed, clawing at her face as the spores burrowed into her skin. Her flesh began to blister, black lines spreading like cracks in glass. Kael didn't think. He moved. His third arm, the one that sprouted from his right shoulder blade, reached for his sword. But the spores were too fast, too thick. Ren was already choking, her lungs filling with fungal threads. There was only one way to save her. Kael brought his own blade down on the joint of his third arm. The bone snapped with a wet crack. Pain lanced through him, white-hot and blinding. He bit through his lip, tasting copper. The severed arm fell to the ground, still twitching. Kael grabbed the arm and pressed the bleeding stump against Ren's chest. His blood, still fresh, seeped into her wounds. The spores blackened, died, and flaked away. Ren gasped, her eyes clearing. She looked at Kael, at the gushing socket where his arm had been, and her expression shifted from fear to something like awe. You. She breathed. Stay still, Kael said, his voice strained. He tore a strip from his cloak and bound the wound. The bleeding slowed, but the pain remained, a dull, throbbing anchor. The squad was silent. They watched him, their weapons lowered. Grunt stood, flexing his stump. The tiny tendril curled and uncurled, as if testing the air. He's one of us, Grunt said, his voice rough. He bled for us. Ren nodded, her hand touching her chest where Kael's blood had saved her. I'm sorry. Kael shook his head. We move. Now. Before more pods burst. They marched deeper into the wastes, the fungal trees closing in around them. Kael's missing arm throbbed with phantom pain. His suppressing color hummed, and he knew Voss had seen everything. The Inquisitor's voice crackled through the color, barely a whisper. Clever. But you're still mine. Kael didn't answer. He focused on the path ahead, on the squad that now walked behind him, their eyes no longer hostile. He had bought their loyalty with his own flesh. That night, they made camp in a hollow beneath a giant toadstool. Kael sat apart, his back against the slimy stalk, watching the firelight flicker across his squadmates' faces. Grunt was asleep, his tendril twitching in his dreams. Grunt was on watch, her dagger out, scanning the darkness. Kael's severed arm lay on the ground a few feet away, forgotten in the chaos. He had meant to burn it, but exhaustion had overtaken him. Now, in the dim light, he saw it move. A single, thin tendril sprouted from the cut end of the arm. It curled upward, filling the air. Then another tendril. And another. The arm began to pulse, a soft, rhythmic beat, like a heart. The flesh around the wound darkened, cracked, and from the fissures, a faint purple glow emerged. Kael's blood. His mutated blood was still alive. And it was growing something new. A plague heart. The tendrils burrowed into the soil, anchoring the arm. The glow intensified, spreading in a web of black veins across the ground. Kael watched, frozen, as a new spore pod began to form at the center of the arm's palm. He had saved his squad. But he had planted a seed that would consume them all. The fungal waste stretched endlessly, a gray-green ocean of spore-laden air and writhing tendrils. Kael's boots squelched into the damp earth, each step releasing a puff of acrid mist. His squad followed in a loose formation, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the horizon. Grunt, the thief, kept close to Kael's left side, her dagger glinting with a thin sheen of oil. Grunt limped behind them, his arm stump wrapped in cloth that had turned black from Kael's blood. The small tentacle that had sprouted from the wound twitched occasionally, but it no longer spread. The ground began to pulse. A low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through Kael's bones, growing stronger with every step. The tendrils around them thickened, curling like serpents, their tips glowing with a faint, sickly light. Kael's third arm, fully regrown after the amputation, tingled with an alien energy. The skin along its forearm had taken on a pale, translucent quality, and veins of dark purple pulsed beneath the surface. He could feel the heart before he saw it, a presence in his mind, a pressure behind his eyes. They crested a ridge of fungal rock, and there it was. The plague heart loomed before them, a grotesque cathedral of flesh and chitin. It rose 300 feet into the air, its surface a tapestry of weeping sores, crystalline growths, and pulsing arteries. Tendrils as thick as tree trunks anchored it to the ground, each one throbbing in time with the low beat that Kael felt in his chest. The air around it shimmered with heat and spores, creating a haze that distorted the light. By the abyss, Grunt whispered, her face pale. It's a city of corruption. Kael said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the heart's core, a massive, orb-like chamber at its center, encased in a lattice of bone and sinew. Inside, something moved. Shadows writhed, and for a moment, Kael thought he saw a face pressed against the inner membrane. His own face. He shook his head, forcing the image away. We need to get inside. The core is the only way to destroy it. Inside. Grunt's voice cracked. We'll be digested before we reach the first layer. Not if I clear a path. Kael raised his third arm. The fingers elongated, the nails sharpening into obsidian claws. He could feel the plague energy within him responding to the heart's call, a song of destruction and rebirth. He was becoming a part of it. A child of the plague. He leveled up. The notification flashed in his mind, cold and clinical, level 7 achieved. Mutation initiated, adamant skeleton. Pain erupted through every bone in his body. Kael screamed, dropping to his knees as his skeleton liquefied and reformed. The calcium in his bones crystallized into a metallic lattice, flexible yet unbreakable. His ribs expanded, his spine elongated, and his skull thickened. When the transformation ended, he stood taller, his skin stretched tight over a frame that felt like forged steel. The heart's psychic assault hit him a moment later, a wave of despair, madness, and hunger that would have shattered a normal mind. Kael's adamant skeleton absorbed the impact, the lattice vibrating like a tuning fork. He felt the attack, but it couldn't break him. His thoughts remained his own. Stay behind me, he growled, his voice deeper, resonating with metallic undertones. He charged. The tendrils reacted instantly, lashing out like whips. Kael's third arm caught one, its claws digging into the flesh, and he yanked, tearing it from the ground. The wound sprayed ichor, and the tendril withered. He moved forward, each step a deliberate strike, using his bone spike to puncture the smaller cysts that burst with corrosive fluid. Grunt followed, her dagger slashing at the tendrils that slipped past Kael's guard. Grunt hurled rocks, keeping the larger growths at bay. They reached the heart's base. The bone lattice was thick here, woven into a wall that pulsed with a dark light. Kael placed his palm against it. The surface was warm, almost alive. He felt the heart's rhythm sync with his own heartbeat. "I need a bridge point," he said, scanning the lattice. His weeping eye opened, tears of blood streaming down his cheek. The world shifted into shades of gray and red, and he saw it a seam, a hairline fracture in the bone where the growth had been weak. He summoned a bone javelin. The weapon formed from his left arm, a spear of calcium and metal that crackled with plague energy. He took a breath, aimed, and threw. The javelin struck the seam with the force of a cannonball. The lattice cracked, splintered, and shattered inward, creating a hole large enough for a man to crawl through. Ichor gushed from the wound, and the heart let out a deafening shriek that sent the squad reeling. Kael didn't wait. He dove through the opening, his third arm leading, claws extended. Inside, the chamber was vast and hollow. The walls were alive with veins and nerves, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his own. At the center, suspended by tendrils of pure energy, was a core of crystallized plague, a diamond of corruption that hummed with malevolent intelligence. Kael approached it, his footsteps echoing in the silence. And then the vision hit. The world dissolved. He was no longer in the heart's chamber. He stood in a throne room of black marble, lit by braziers of green flame. Before him, seated on a throne of bones, was the Emperor. The man smiled, his eyes twin pits of darkness. "You are my greatest creation, Kael," the Emperor said, his voice smooth as silk. "The heart is your mother. You were born from her flesh, shaped by her will. Every mutation, every level, was a gift from me." Kael tried to move, but his body was frozen. The Emperor rose, walking toward him, his robes trailing shadows. "You think you're fighting for humanity," the Emperor continued. "You're fighting for me. The plague is my instrument. The Titans are my soldiers. And you are my perfect weapon." He reached out, his fingers brushing Kael's cheek. The touch burned. "Destroy the heart, and you destroy yourself. But you have no choice, do you? That is the tragedy of creation. The child must always kill the parent." The vision shattered. Kael stood before the plague heart's core, his third arm raised, claws poised to strike. The core pulsed, waiting. He could feel the Emperor's presence in the air, a lingering whisper of laughter. "No," Kael whispered. "I am no one's weapon." He drove his claws into the core. The world exploded into light. The vision crystallized around Kael like a shard of frozen time. The Emperor stood before him, not in the flesh, but as a projection of pure malice, his voice echoing through the plague heart's core chamber. "You think this is a war, but no. This is a harvest." Kael's third arm twitched, the plague energy within it resonating with the heart's pulse. The Emperor's image flickered, revealing a memory, a laboratory, centuries old, where alchemists in white robes injected writhing subjects with black ichor. The plague was not a natural catastrophe, it was a weapon, designed to thin the Empire's enemies and cull the weak. Kael was the first successful synthesis, a soldier whose body could absorb and weaponize the plague without succumbing to it. "You are my finest creation," the Emperor said, his laughter like grinding bones. "The heart is your mother, and I am your father. You will end the rebellions, and then you will be my heir." Kael's blood boiled. His adamant skeleton groaned under the strain of his rage, the metallic lattice flexing like living armor. "I am no one's weapon," he snarled. He drove his claws deeper into the core, feeling the plague heart's consciousness writhe against his touch. The chamber trembled, and the tendrils on the floor lashed out, trying to impale him. Kael twisted, using his bone spike to sever a tendril, then planted his feet and pulled. The core cracked, spraying black ichor across his face. The Emperor's image distorted, screaming, "You will destroy yourself." Kael didn't care. He wrenched the core apart with his bare hands, the adamant skeleton absorbing the psychic backlash. But the heart fought back, contracting its chamber like a fist. Kael's left leg was caught between two collapsing bone walls. The pain was instantaneous and absolute, a wet crunch, followed by numbness. He looked down and saw his leg below the knee hanging by a thread of skin and sinew. He didn't hesitate. With a single swing of his third arm, he severed the shreds, freeing himself. He collapsed onto his remaining knee, gasping, as the heart's chamber began to implode. He crawled through the narrowing gap, dragging his stump behind him. The squad's faces appeared at the entrance. Sarah, the scout, her eyes wide. Garrick, the heavy, reaching for him. Kael grabbed Garrick's gauntlet hand and was pulled into the open air. The plate heart behind him detonated, sending a shockwave of black dust across the fungal wastes. The sky cleared, and for the first time in months, sunlight pierced the haze. The squad cheered, clapping Kael on the back. But he didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow, like a puppet with cut strings. He stared at the stump where his left leg used to be, then at his third arm, still pulsing with plague energy. "The Emperor is not our enemy," he said, his voice flat. "He's the plague." The squad fell silent. No one knew what to say. Back at camp, the healers stabilized Kael's stump with a crude tourniquet and promised a wooden leg by morning. He sat alone in his tent, staring at a flickering lantern. His third arm reached out, touching the flame. He didn't feel the burn. The plague energy numbed him. He was becoming something else, something the Emperor had designed. But he refused to be a tool. He would find a way to break the cycle, even if it meant tearing down the Empire itself. Outside, a messenger bird landed on Ilara's tent. She read the scroll, her face paling. The message was short: "The Emperor is dead. Long live the new Emperor." Attached was a portrait, a charcoal sketch of Kael's face, his third eye weeping plague tears. Ilara crumpled the paper and looked toward Kael's tent, her hand drifting to the dagger at her belt. The iron crown was cold against Kael's brow, a weight that pressed down not just on his skull but on his very soul. The remnants of the Inquisition gauntmen in scorched robes knelt before him in the ash-choked throne room. Their leader, a man with hollow eyes named Inquisitor Malachar, placed the crown with trembling hands. "You are the only one who can control the plague, Lord Kael. The Emperor is dead. Long live the Emperor." Kael's third arm twitched, its plague-infused sinews pulsing green under the grey light filtering through shattered windows. He could feel the weight of their desperation, their fear. They didn't see a man, they saw a leash for the monster that had consumed their world. His left leg was gone, replaced by a crude pack of ironwood strapped to his stump. The pain was a constant companion, a reminder of what he had sacrificed. "I accept," Kael said, his voice flat. He had no choice. If he refused, they would hunt him, dissect him, or worse, turn him into a weapon against the very people he had fought to save. He looked at Ilara, standing among the crowd of rebel leaders who had been brought in chains. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held a spark of something: hope, perhaps, or calculation. The first decree was simple: all rebel prisoners were to be freed. The second was harder: all plague research was to be burned, every vial of infected blood destroyed, every laboratory dismantled. The Inquisition protested, but Kael's third eye opened, its weeping gaze sweeping the room. "I will not be the architect of another genocide," he said. "The plague ends with me." That night, in a tower overlooking the ruined capital, Kael bled into a silver basin. His blood was thick, black, and alive with writhing plague spores. He mixed it with herbs and alchemical solvents, following the formula Ilara had salvaged from the rebel archives. It took 3 days of constant mutation, his bones cracking, his skin peeling, his organs shifting to produce a single vial of vaccine. Each dose required him to level up, to risk a fatal transformation. But the mutation arbitrage held. His body became a forge, churning out salvation at the cost of his humanity. Weeks passed. Kael rarely left the tower. His limbs changed daily, one day a crab-like claw, the next a tentacle of bone. He learned to control them, to shape them into tools for crafting more vaccine. The people below called him the saint of the plague, but he felt like a monster wearing a saint's mask. Ilara visited often, her allegiance now clear. She was his ally, his confidant, the only one who saw the man beneath the mutations. But even she flinched when his third eye rolled in its socket, scanning for threats no one else could see. One night, as the moon hung low and red, Kael's third eye snapped open without his will. The vision was sharp, terrible, a new plague heart, vast and pulsating, forming in the distant mountains. The tendrils of infection were spreading, faster than before. The cycle was not over. It would never be over. Kael stood, his peg leg scraping the stone floor. He looked at the vials of vaccine lined up on the table, at the portrait of himself as emperor that hung on the wall, a man with 3 arms and a crown, his face half skeletal. He whispered, "I'll roll the dice one more time."